Sometimes the most broken hearts find each other in the most unexpected places. When you've lost everything that matters, sometimes saving something else is the only way to save yourself. Samuel Hayes found a starving donkey tied to a dead tree on his ranch. The 70-year-old widower had been alone for 3 years since his wife Martha died. His heart felt as empty as the desert around him. The donkey was skin and bones, left to die in the Arizona heat. Sam cut her free and took her home. He didn't know why. Maybe because they were both abandoned, both forgotten. As he nursed the donkey back to health, something strange happened. The more he cared for her, the more alive he felt. For the first time since Martha's death, Sam had purpose again. The donkey grew stronger, and so did Sam. Their bond became something neither expected. In saving her, he found a reason to keep going. What Sam didn't realize was that this donkey would lead him to the most important discovery of his life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Samuel Hayes sat on his porch as dawn painted the Arizona sky in shades of amber and rose. The weathered planks beneath his boots creaked with each gentle rock of his chair, a sound that had once brought him comfort but now only emphasized the silence. 3 years had passed since Martha drew her last breath in their bedroom upstairs. Yet Sam still caught himself listening for her soft humming as she moved through their morning routine. The silver chain around his neck held Martha's wedding ring, warm against his chest. He'd worn it there since the funeral, unable to bear seeing it on the dresser where she placed it each night for 45 years. The gold band was thin from decades of wear, polished smooth by her hands as she twisted it when she was thinking. Sam touched it through his shirt, a habit that had become as natural as breathing. Broken Creek Ranch stretched out before him, 2,300 acres of high desert that had once been their kingdom. Now it felt more like a monument to better times. The barn doors hung crooked on rusted hinges, and tumbleweeds gathered against fence posts that needed mending. Sam fixed what he had to, but couldn't summon the energy for anything more. What was the point when there was no one to share it with? Martha had been 17 when they met at a church social in Tucson. Sam was 19, fresh from his father's ranch, with calloused hands and a shy smile that made her laugh. She'd worn a yellow dress that day, bright as a summer morning, and when she agreed to let him drive her home, Sam knew his life had changed forever. They married 2 years later, honeymooned in California, and came back to build their dream on this patch of desert that everyone else said was too harsh for anything good to grow. They proved them wrong, at least for a while. The ranch had thrived in those early decades. Sam's cattle brought top dollar, and Martha's vegetable garden produced enough to feed half the county. They'd hosted barbecues where neighbors came from miles around, filling their home with laughter and music that echoed off the canyon walls. Martha had a way of making everyone feel welcome, of turning strangers into family before they finished their first plate of her famous enchiladas. But children never came. They'd tried for years, hoping and praying through one disappointment after another. The doctors had no answers, just apologetic shrugs and suggestions about adoption that somehow never felt right. Martha threw herself into caring for everything else that needed tending: injured birds, orphan calves, the neighborhood kids who showed up hungry and lonely. Sam watched her mother them all with a fierce tenderness that made his chest ache with love and lost in later years. They'd found peace in their quiet partnership. They were enough for each other, Martha always said. They had their land, their animals, their faith, and their love. What more did anyone need? Sam had believed it then, surrounded by the warmth of her presence and the rhythm of their shared life. Now the silence felt like a living thing, pressing against him from all sides. He tried to maintain their routines at first morning coffee. For 2, evening news at 6, Sunday dinners after church. But making conversation with an empty chair had broken something inside him that he couldn't seem to fix. The coffee grew cold, the news played to an empty room, and Sundays stretched like an eternity of hollow bells and sympathetic looks. His neighbor, Bill Thompson, stopped by twice a week with groceries and gentle lectures about taking better care of himself. Reverend Tom from the Methodist Church made his rounds monthly, sitting on the porch with sweet tea and patient ears for whatever Sam was willing to share. The ladies from Martha's quilting circle brought casseroles and updates about people Sam no longer had the energy to care about. They all meant well, but their kindness only highlighted the absence that had become the center of his world. Sam rose from his chair and walked to the porch railing, gripping the sun-warmed wood with hands that showed every one of his 70 years. The morning air carried the scent of sage and dust, the same smell that had greeted him for 5 decades on this land. Below, the pastures stretched toward the foothills, empty except for the handful of cattle he kept more from habit than necessity. The sight of them stirred a memory of Martha standing at this same spot, pointing excitedly at a newborn calf taking its first wobbly steps. "Look at that little one go," she'd said, her face bright with the joy she found in every new thing. "Bless his heart, he doesn't know yet how hard the world can be. Maybe that's a gift." Sam had wrapped his arms around her from behind, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and the lavender soap she used. "Maybe we should all be so lucky," he'd replied, and she'd leaned back against him with a contented sigh. The memory faded, leaving him alone with the morning light and the weight of 3 years' worth of unspoken words. He'd talked to Martha in those first months after she died, carrying on both sides of conversations as he moved through his days. But even that small comfort had abandoned him, leaving behind only the echo of his own voice in rooms that had once been filled with her laughter. His cell phone rang from inside the house, its shrill tone cutting through the desert quiet. Sam ignored it, as he did most calls these days. It would be Bill or the Reverend or one of Martha's friends, checking in with the careful concern of people who wanted to help but didn't know how. He appreciated their intentions, but their words couldn't fill the hole that Martha's absence had carved out of his chest. The phone stopped ringing, then started again. Sam sighed and shuffled inside, his joints protesting the movement. The kitchen still smelled faintly of the coffee he'd made at dawn, now cold in the pot. Martha's coffee mug sat in the cabinet where he'd placed it the day after the funeral. Too painful to use, but impossible to put away. "A's," he answered, his voice rougher than he'd expected. "Sam, it's Elena Rodriguez. I'm sorry to call so early, but I wanted to catch you before you headed out to check your fences." Dr. Rodriguez was the local veterinarian, a woman in her 40s who'd moved to town 5 years ago and quickly earned the respect of every rancher in the county. She had gentle hands and a practical manner that reminded Sam of Martha in some ways. He'd used her services a few times for his remaining cattle and found her competent and kind. "What can I do for you, Doc?" "I wanted to give you a heads up about something. We've had reports of abandoned animals being found around the county. Someone's been dumping them on remote properties, leaving them tied up without food or water. I know you're out on your land a lot, and I wanted you to know what to look for." Sam leaned against the kitchen counter, processing the information. Animal abuse wasn't uncommon in rural areas, but the deliberate cruelty of abandonment struck him as particularly vicious. "What kind of animals?" "Mostly horses and donkeys, some goats. They're usually in pretty bad shape by the time they're found. If you see anything suspicious, please call me right away. These animals need immediate medical attention." "I'll keep an eye out," Sam promised. "Anything else I should know?" "Just that whoever's doing this seems to be targeting older properties, places that are off the beaten path. Your ranch fits that description, so please be careful. And Sam?" "Yeah? Thank you. I know things have been hard for you since Martha passed, but you're still one of the good ones. These animals need people like you watching out for them. The line went quiet after she hung up, leaving Sam alone with his thoughts, and the morning light streaming through Martha's kitchen curtains. He poured himself a fresh cup of coffee and returned to the porch, Dr. Rodriguez's words echoing in his mind. He'd always had a soft spot for animals in distress, a trait Martha had encouraged and shared. They'd rescued more strays over the years than he could count, finding homes for most and keeping the ones that nobody else wanted. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd become the very thing he'd once helped, abandoned and struggling to survive. But unlike the animals they'd saved, Sam couldn't seem to find his way back to anything resembling life. He existed, moved through his days with mechanical precision, but the spark that had once defined him felt as dead as the mesquite tree by the front gate. Sam settled back into his chair and gazed out at the land that had been his world for most of his adult life. Somewhere out there, animals were suffering, left to die by people who saw them as disposable. The thought stirred something in his chest, a flicker of the righteous anger that used to drive him to action. It wasn't much, but it was the first emotion besides grief that he'd felt in months. He finished his coffee and headed inside to gather his gear for the day's fence inspection. If someone was dumping animals on remote properties, Sam wanted to be ready. It wouldn't bring Martha back or heal the wound in his heart, but maybe helping something else in pain would remind him what it felt like to matter again. The morning sun climbed higher as Sam loaded his truck with fence tools and a cooler of water. He paused at the door, looking back at the house that had been their home for 5 decades. Martha's presence lingered in every corner, from the quilt she'd made draped over the couch to the herb garden she'd planted by the kitchen window. For the first time in months, Sam felt a sense of purpose beyond simple survival. He couldn't save Martha, couldn't bring back the life they built together. But maybe, if he was lucky, he could save something else. The sun was merciless by 10 in the morning, already promising another scorching day that would drive sensible creatures into whatever shade they could find. Sam had been riding fence for 2 hours, checking posts and tightening wire with the methodical precision of 5 decades' practice. The work felt good in his hands, familiar and purposeful in a way that required no thought beyond the next repair. He was 3 miles from the house when he saw her dot at first. Sam thought it was debris caught against the old mesquite tree, something blown there by the wind and tangled in the branches. But as his truck drew closer, the shape resolved into something that made his chest tighten with recognition and rage. A donkey, small and brown, tied to the dead tree with a rope around her neck. She stood with her head down, sides heaving, RIBs visible beneath a coat dulled by neglect and dehydration. Sam slammed on the brakes and was out of the truck before the dust settled. The donkey didn't even lift her head at his approach, too weak or too broken to care about another potential threat. Up close, the extent of her condition became clear. She was maybe hours from death, her eyes sunken and glassy, her breathing shallow and rapid. "Jesus," Sam whispered, his hands shaking as he reached for his pocket knife. The rope was thick and new, cinched tight enough to restrict her movement, but not quite tight enough to strangle her outright. Someone had wanted her to suffer before she died. The donkey's ears flicked when Sam touched the rope, but she didn't have the strength to pull away. As he sawed through the fibers, he found himself talking to her in the same gentle voice he'd once used with Martha during her worst days in the hospital. "Easy, girl. Easy now. I've got you. Nobody's going to hurt you anymore." The rope parted with a sharp snap, and the donkey swayed on her feet, freed but too weak to understand what freedom meant. Sam caught her as she started to collapse, his arms going around her neck to keep her upright. She smelled of fear and suffering, her coat matted with dust and something worse. "Come on now," Sam murmured, surprised by the steadiness in his voice. "Let's get you home." Loading her into the truck required patience and strength Sam wasn't sure he still possessed. The donkey couldn't help herself. and her dead weight was more than his 70-year-old back should have been asked to handle. But somehow, with rest breaks and gentle coaxing, he managed to get her into the truck bed on a bed of old blankets. He kept for emergencies. The drive back to the ranch seemed to take forever. Sam kept checking his rearview mirror, terrified that he'd find the donkey had given up and died in the back of his truck. But each time, he saw her ears twitch or caught the slight rise and fall of her breathing. She was fighting, clinging to life with the same stubborn determination that had kept Sam going through his darkest days. At the ranch, Sam backed the truck up to the barn and gently lowered the tailgate. The donkey watched him with eyes that held a flicker of something that might have been hope or might have been simple exhaustion. Either way, she didn't resist when he slipped a rope around her neck loosely this time, just enough to guide her. "That's it, girl. Just a few more steps." Sam led her to the box stall where he and Martha had once nursed an injured horse back to health. The space was clean and spacious, with fresh straw on the floor and a water trough that he quickly filled. From the hose, the donkey went straight to the water, plunging her muzzle deep and drinking with desperate gulps that worried Sam almost as much as her previous condition. "Easy there. Too much too fast will make you sick." He gently pulled her head up after she'd drunk her fill, then went to fetch hay from the storage room. As he moved through the familiar motions of caring for an injured animal, Sam felt something shift inside his chest. It was a feeling he'd almost forgotten, the particular satisfaction that came from having something depend on him, something that needed his knowledge and care to survive. The donkey ate the hay with mechanical precision, her body demanding fuel even as her spirit remained guarded. Sam watched from the stall door, noting the way she favored her left hind leg and the careful way she held her head. Someone hadn't just abandoned her. They'd heard her first thought as he observed her. Memories surfaced of the veterinary kitty and Martha had assembled over the years. It had been Martha's idea, born from her conviction that they had a responsibility to help any creature that found its way to their land. The kit was comprehensive antibiotics, wound care supplies, vitamins, even basic surgical instruments for emergencies when the vet couldn't make it out in time. Sam hadn't touched the kit since Martha's final illness, when he'd exhausted its contents trying to make her more comfortable in those last difficult weeks. The thought of opening it now felt like disturbing a grave, but the donkey's condition left him no choice. He found the kit in the barn's tack room, covered with dust and wrapped in the old saddle blanket Martha had used to keep it clean. Sam's hands trembled as he unwrapped it, exposing the carefully organized supplies that represented so many acts of mercy over the years. Every bandage and bottle held memories of animals they'd saved together, small victories against suffering that had given their lives deeper meaning. With the kit open before him, Sam began the familiar process of assessment and treatment. The donkey submitted to his examination with weary patience, too exhausted to fight even if she'd wanted to. He cleaned her wounds, there were several, inflicted by rope or whip, and applied antibiotic ointment with hands that remembered their purpose despite the long absence from such work. "You're going to be okay," he told her as he worked, though he wasn't entirely sure he believed it. "We'll take this one day at a time, one step at a time. That's how healing works, slow and steady, with someone who cares keeping watch." As if she understood, the donkey's eyes focused on his face for the first time since he'd found her. There was intelligence there, buried under layers of trauma and exhaustion, and something that looked like cautious trust. Sam felt his throat tighten with unexpected emotion. By afternoon, Sam had called Dr. Rodriguez and given her a full report on the donkey's condition. Elena arrived within an hour, her truck loaded with medical supplies and her manner brisk with professional concern. "How long do you think she was out there?" Elena asked as she completed her examination. "Hard to say. A day, maybe two at most. Much longer, and we wouldn't have found her alive." Elena nodded grimly. "She's dehydrated and malnourished, but her Vitals are stronger than I expected. You did good work getting her stabilized. What are her chances? With proper care? Good. She's young, maybe 4 or 5 years old, and she's got fight in her. But she's going to need around-the-clock attention for the next few days, and it'll be weeks before she's back to full strength. Sam felt something settle in his chest, a decision making itself without conscious thought. I can do that. Elena looked at him carefully, as if seeing him clearly for the first time in months. Sam, this is going to be a lot of work. And given everything you've been through, I want to do this, Sam interrupted, surprising himself, with the firmness in his voice. She needs help, and I need something to care for. Seems like we might be able to help each other. Elena smiled, the first genuine smile Sam had seen directed at him in longer than he could remember. All right then, let me show you what you'll need to do. They spent the next hour going over care instructions, feeding schedules, and warning signs to watch for. Elena left behind a supply of medications and her promise to check back the next day. As her truck disappeared down the ranch road, Sam found himself alone with his patient and a sense of purpose he'd thought was lost forever. The donkey was sleeping when he returned to her stall, lying in the clean straw with her legs tucked under her and her breathing deep and steady. Sam sat on a hay bale outside the stall and watched her rest, noting the way her ears flicked at every sound and the careful way she held herself even in sleep. I don't know what to call you yet, he said quietly, but I suppose we'll figure that out as we go. Most good things take time to reveal themselves properly. As evening approached, Sam found himself thinking about Martha and how she would have responded to finding the donkey. She would have been outraged by the cruelty and determined to provide whatever care was needed. But more than that, she would have seen the moment for what it truly was, not just a rescue, but an unexpected gift wrapped in suffering. Sometimes the good Lord works in mysterious ways, she used to say when life presented them with challenges that turned into blessings. The trick is staying open to the mystery instead of fighting it. Sam touched the chain around his neck, feeling Martha's ring warm against his palm. For the first time since her death, he felt like he might be ready to stop fighting the mystery and start embracing whatever came next. The donkey stirred in her sleep, and Sam found himself smiling at the sight. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new reasons to keep going. For tonight, it was enough to sit in the gathering darkness and listen to the sound of another living thing breathing peacefully nearby. Sam woke before dawn to the sound of movement in the barn. For a moment, he lay in the darkness of his bedroom, disoriented by the unfamiliar noise, before memory rushed back and brought him fully awake. The donkey, he still hadn't settled on a name for her, was up and moving around her stall. He dressed quickly and made his way to the barn by the light of his flashlight. The donkey stood at the stall door, her ears pricked forward and her eyes more alert than they'd been the day before. When she saw Sam, she nickered softly, a sound so unexpected and welcome that it stopped him in his tracks. Well, good morning. To you too, Sam said, his voice rough with sleep and something deeper. Feeling better, are we? The donkey's response was to push her nose through the stall bars, clearly looking for breakfast. Sam laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in longer than he could remember. The sound echoed strangely in the barn, as if the space itself had forgotten what laughter sounded like. As Sam prepared her morning feed, he found himself talking to the donkey in a way that felt natural and necessary. You know, it's been quiet around here for a while. Too quiet, if I'm being honest. A man gets used to conversation, even if it's just one-sided. The donkey watched him work, her attention focused and patient, in a way that reminded Sam of Martha during their early mornings. Together, Martha had been a quiet person before coffee, content to listen while Sam talked through the day's plans, or shared whatever thoughts had carried over from his dreams. Those memories had been painful for so long that Sam had learned to push them away before they could take hold. But standing in the barn with the donkey's gentle presence nearby, the memories felt different, warmer, more like a blessing than a curse. After the donkey had eaten, Sam set about building her a proper feeding trough. The one in the stall was cracked and too high for her shorter stature, a leftover from when they kept horses. Sam hadn't built anything in 3 years, hadn't felt the satisfaction of creating something useful with his hands, but the work came back to him like muscle memory. He selected wood from the lumber pile behind the barn, pieces of oak and pine that he and Martha had bought for various ranch projects over the years. As he measured and cut, Sam found himself remembering the other things they'd built together. The chicken coop that had housed Martha's beloved hens, the garden boxes where she'd grown vegetables that fed half the county, the front porch swing, where they'd spent countless evenings watching the sunset paint the desert sky. Martha had been the dreamer, full of ideas for improvements and additions that would make their ranch more functional or beautiful. Sam had been the one who figured out how to make her dreams real, translating her visions into lumber and nails and sweat. It had been one of their best partnerships, the way her imagination sparked his craftsmanship into something greater than either could achieve alone. The feeding trough took most of the morning to complete, but when Sam finished, he felt a deep satisfaction that had been missing from his life for too long. The donkey seemed to approve as well, immediately investigating the new addition to her stall with the thoroughness of someone who understood the value of proper equipment. "That should work better for you," Sam said, filling the trough with fresh. "Hey, a lady deserves to eat in comfort." The donkey's ears perked at the word lady, and Sam found himself smiling. "Is that what you are then? A lady? You certainly have better manners than most of the animals I've known." As the days passed, Sam's routine began to revolve around the donkey's needs. He rose early to check on her, spent his mornings working on ranch improvements he'd neglected for years, and devoted his afternoons to her care and recovery. The work gave structure to days that had previously stretched empty and purposeless before him. By the end of the first week, the donkey had gained enough strength to venture into the small paddock attached to her stall. Sam watched from the fence as she explored the space with careful steps, testing the ground and sniffing the air like someone learning to trust the world again. Her coat was already showing signs of improvement, gaining luster as proper nutrition did its work, and her eyes held a brightness that spoke of returning health. Sam found himself sharing more of his thoughts with her as the days went on. Conversations that ranged from practical matters of ranch management to deeper reflections on loss and loneliness. The donkey listened with the patience of a natural counselor, her presence steady and non-judgmental in a way that made it safe for Sam to voice feelings he'd kept buried for years. "Martha and we always wanted children," he told her one afternoon as he brushed her coat. "Tried for near on 20 years before we finally accepted it wasn't going to happen. Martha took it harder than I did, I think. She had so much love to give, and nowhere to put it except into everything else that needed caring for." The donkey stood quietly under his ministrations, occasionally turning her head to look at him with those intelligent dark eyes. Sam had the distinct impression that she was listening, really listening, in a way that few humans ever managed. We talked about adopting, went to meetings, and filled out papers. But somehow it never felt right, you know? Like we were trying to force something that was supposed to happen naturally. Martha said maybe our purpose was different. Maybe we were meant to care for the things that nobody else wanted. As he spoke, Sam realized that Martha's words had proven prophetic in ways neither of them could have imagined. Here he was, caring for an abandoned creature that nobody else had wanted, finding in that care a reason to keep going when he'd nearly given up on everything. The transformation wasn't just happening to the donkey. Sam realized he was eating regular meals again, sleeping through the night, taking care of his appearance in ways he'd neglected since Martha's death. The simple act of having something depend on him had awakened parts of himself that grief had put to sleep. Dr. Rodriguez stopped by for her weekly checkup, pronouncing herself impressed with both the donkey's progress and Sam's renewed vitality. "She's gained 15 pounds since you found her," Elena observed, running practiced hands over the donkey's frame. "And her coat is starting to shine." "You're doing excellent work, Sam." "She's doing most of the work herself," Sam replied, but he felt a flush of pride at the praise. "I'm just providing the opportunity. Don't sell yourself short. Healing takes more than just food and shelter. It takes someone who cares enough to pay attention, to notice the small changes and respond to them. That's what you're giving her." Elena's words stayed with Sam long after she'd driven away. He'd always thought of himself as practical rather than nurturing, someone who solved problems through action rather than motion. But watching the donkey's gradual recovery, he was beginning to understand that caring itself was a kind of action, one that required its own forms of skill and dedication. That evening, as Sam sat on his porch watching the donkey graze in her paddock, he felt something shift inside his chest. The crushing weight of grief was still there, would probably always be there in some form, but it no longer felt like the defining feature of his existence. For the first time in 3 years, he could imagine a future that held more than just memories and regret. The donkey looked up from her grazing and caught his eye, as if she sensed the importance of the moment. Sam raised his hand in a small wave, and she bobbed her head in what looked remarkably like a response. In that simple exchange, Sam glimpsed the possibility of connection beyond loss, of love that could grow in the spaces that grief had carved out of his heart. "Thank you," he said quietly, not sure if he was speaking to the donkey, to Martha, or to whatever force had brought them together. It didn't matter. Gratitude, he was learning, didn't require a specific target to be real and transformative. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple that Martha had always loved. For the first time since her death, Sam watched the sunset without feeling like he was betraying her memory by finding beauty in a world she could no longer share. Instead, he felt her presence in the moment, approving and gentle, like a blessing. On whatever came next, 2 weeks after finding the donkey, Sam stood in Martha's old garden holding a pair of her hand tools. The pruning shears felt familiar in his palm, worn smooth by her grip over the years, while the small spade still carried traces of the red desert soil she'd loved to work. The garden had gone wild in the 3 years since her death, native plants reclaiming the space where she'd once coaxed tomatoes and peppers to thrive in the harsh climate. The donkey watched from her paddock as Sam began the slow work of clearing weeds and dead growth. She'd grown stronger each day, her ribs no longer visible beneath a coat that was beginning to shine with health. More importantly, her personality was emerging from the protective shell of trauma and neglect. She was curious, Sam had discovered, with a tendency to investigate everything within reach of her paddock. She was also gentle, never pushy or demanding despite her growing strength. But perhaps most remarkably, she seemed to understand that Sam needed her company in ways that went beyond simple animal care. Martha would have a fit seeing this garden in such a state, Sam told the donkey as he worked. She spent 30 years building up this soil, bringing in compost and amendments to make things grow in dirt that most folks said was only good for cactus and scorpions. The donkey's ears pricked forward at the sound of his voice, and she moved closer to the fence that separated her paddock from the garden space. Sam had noticed that she seemed to enjoy these one-sided conversations, as if his voice provided a comfort that went beyond the words themselves. She always said gardens were about hope, Sam continued, pulling up a particularly stubborn weed. You plant something in faith that it will grow, tend it with care, and trust that the seasons will do their part. Martha had more faith than anyone I ever knew. As he cleared the weeds, Sam began to envision what the space might become again. Not Martha's garden exactly. That would feel like trespass on sacred ground. But something new that honored her memory while serving the present. Mead. The donkey would benefit from fresh vegetables. And Sam found himself imagining the satisfaction of growing food with his own hands again. The work was harder than he'd expected. 3 years of inactivity had left him weaker than he cared to admit. And the desert sun showed no mercy, even in the early morning hours. But there was something healing in the rhythm of clearing and digging, in the gradual revelation of the rich soil that Martha had spent decades nurturing. By midday, Sam had cleared a section large enough for a small kitchen garden. His back ached, and his hands were dirty, but he felt more accomplished than he had in years. The donkey had watched the entire process with what seemed like approval, occasionally nickering encouragement when Sam paused to rest. "What do you think, girl?" Sam asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Should we try growing some carrots for you? Maybe some of those apples you're so fond of?" The donkey had developed a particular enthusiasm for the apple slices Sam brought her each afternoon. She would take them delicately from his palm, savoring each piece with obvious pleasure. It was one of many small preferences and quirks that made her feel less like a rescued animal and more like a companion with distinct opinions and desires. Over lunch, Sam found himself thinking about names for the donkey. He'd been calling her girl or lady for 2 weeks, but she deserved something more permanent, something that honored who she was becoming rather than what she'd survived. Martha had always been good with names, choosing monikers that somehow captured the essence of each creature they'd helped over the years. That afternoon, Bill Thompson stopped by with supplies from town and updates on the search for whoever had been abandoning animals. 3 more had been found since Sam discovered the donkey, all in similar conditions of neglect and abuse. The authorities were taking the matter seriously now, treating it as part of a larger pattern of criminal activity. "Sheriff asked me to tell you they appreciate what you did," Bill said, scratching the donkey's forehead through the fence. "Words gotten around about how well she's doing. Folks are impressed." Sam felt heat rise in his cheeks at the praise. Just doing what needed doing. Maybe so, but not everyone would have taken on the responsibility. This kind of care, it's a commitment. Bill studied the donkey with the eye of someone who'd spent his life around livestock. "She's gonna make a full recovery, looks to me. Probably be ready for adoption soon if you're not planning to keep her." The suggestion hit Sam like a physical blow. In all his focus on the donkey's recovery, he hadn't seriously considered that she might eventually go to another home. The thought of loading her into a trailer and watching her disappear down the ranch road left him feeling hollow and panicked. "I haven't decided anything yet," Sam managed, his voice tight with emotion he couldn't quite name. Bill nodded diplomatically, clearly sensing he'd touched on sensitive ground. "Course not. Just mentioning it because Elena asked me to feel you out. She's got a list of people interested in donkey adoption, good folks with proper facilities, but there's no rush." After Bill left, Sam sat on his porch and watched the donkey graze in her paddock. The idea of giving her up felt like betrayal, but he couldn't quite articulate why. She wasn't his property. He'd rescued her, provided emergency care, but that didn't give him permanent claim to her life. Yet the thought of her living anywhere else seemed fundamentally wrong. "What do you think?" he asked her, though she was too far away to hear. "Are you happy here? Or are you just making the best of a temporary situation?" As if summoned by his voice, the donkey looked up from her grazing and walked to the fence closest to the porch. She stood there watching him with those intelligent dark eyes, her ears forward in a posture Sam had learned to associate with contentment. In that moment, she looked less like a rescued animal and more like someone choosing to stay. That evening, Sam called Dr. Rodriguez to discuss the donkey's progress and, reluctantly, the question of her future placement. Elena listened patiently as he stumbled through his concerns about timing and suitable homes. "Sam," she said gently when he finished, "can I ask you something? Do you want to keep her?" The question hung in the air between them, simple and direct, in a way that cut through all of Sam's careful rationalizations. "I don't know if that's the right thing for her," he said finally. "That's not what I asked. Do you want to keep her?" Sam closed his eyes and let himself feel the truth he'd been avoiding. "Yes," he whispered. "God help me. Yes, I do." "Then keep her," Elena said simply. "She's healthy. You've got the facilities, and from what I can see, you both benefit from the arrangement. Why complicate something that's working? But she deserves better than what? A ranch where she's loved and cared for by someone who pays attention to her needs. Sam, that donkey has been through hell. She knows what bad looks like. If she's content where she is, maybe we should trust her judgment." After hanging up, Sam walked out to the paddock where the donkey was settling down for the night. She nickered softly when she saw him, a sound that had become as familiar and comforting as any he'd known. He opened the gate and stepped inside, something he'd only done during medical treatments and cleaning. The donkey didn't move away as he approached. Instead, she stretched her neck toward him, clearly inviting the gentle scratching behind her ears that she'd grown to enjoy. Sam obliged, marveling at how soft her coat had become under proper care. "I've been thinking about names for you," he said quietly. "Considered a lot of possibilities, but none of them felt right. Today, though, when Bill started talking about you leaving, I realized something." The donkey leaned into his touch, her eyes half closed with contentment. "You're not just any donkey I happened to rescue. You're the one who saved me right back. And that got me thinking about Martha, about something she used to say when times got hard." Sam's voice grew thick with memory. She'd say, "Don't you lose hope, Samuel Hayes. Hope is what gets us through the dark times and into the light." The donkey turned her head to look at him directly, as if she understood the significance of what he was sharing. "So that's what I'd like to call you, if you don't mind. Hope, because that's what you gave me when I thought I'd lost it forever." As if in response to her new name, Hope nuzzled Sam's shoulder with gentle affection. The gesture was so tender, so clearly intentional, that Sam felt his eyes fill with tears he didn't try to hide. Standing in the paddock with Hope's warm breath on his neck and her trusting presence beside him, Sam felt something fundamental shift in his understanding of his life. For 3 years, he'd been existing in a state of suspended animation, neither fully alive nor completely dead. But Hope had given him a reason to engage with the world again, to care about tomorrow in ways that extended beyond simple survival. The garden would grow, Hope would thrive, and Sam would learn to live again, not as the man he'd been before Martha's death, but as someone new, shaped by loss but not defined by it. Someone who understood that love could take many forms, and that sometimes salvation came on 4 legs with a gentle heart and patient eyes. "Welcome home, Hope," Sam whispered into the desert night. "I promise you'll never have to wonder where your next meal is coming from, or whether someone will be there when you need them. You're family now." Hope responded with a soft whicker that sounded remarkably like agreement. In the distance, coyotes called to each other across the darkening landscape, but inside the paddock, all was peace and possibility. Sam had found his reason to keep going, and she had found her forever home. Neither would ever have to face the world alone again. A month after naming her Hope, Sam made a discovery that changed everything. He was cleaning her stall when he noticed the subtle changes in her body shape, the slight rounding of her belly that spoke of new life growing within. At first, he told himself it was simply the result of good nutrition and regular care. But as the days passed, the signs became unmistakable. Hope was pregnant. Sam sat heavily on a hay bale, his mind reeling with the implications. The timeline suggested she'd been bred before her abandonment, which meant her previous owners had likely dumped her, knowing she was carrying a foal. The cruelty of it left him breathless with rage and something deeper, a fierce protectiveness that surprised him with its intensity. "Well, girl," he said softly, watching Hope methodically work her way through her morning hay, "looks like we're going to have more company than we planned." Hope lifted her head and regarded him with those intelligent dark eyes, as if she understood the weight of what he'd discovered. Sam rose and moved to her side, running gentle hands over her flanks where the new life was beginning to show. She stood calmly under his examination, trusting him completely with her most vulnerable moment. The realization that Hope was pregnant sent Sam into a flurry of research and preparation. He drove to town that afternoon and came back with every book on donkey breeding and foal care he could find at the library. Sarah Henderson, the librarian, had been Martha's friend and seemed genuinely pleased to see Sam engaging with the world again. "Planning to become a donkey expert?" she asked, with a warm smile as she checked out his stack of books. "Seems like the responsible thing to do," Sam replied. "Hope's gonna need someone who knows what they're doing when the time comes." Sarah's expression softened at the mention of Hope's name. The whole county had heard about Sam's rescue by Mal, and the story had taken on a life of its own in the way that small communities embrace tales of redemption and new beginnings. "Martha would be so proud of what you're doing," Sarah said quietly. "She always said you had the biggest heart of anyone she knew, even if you tried to hide it behind all that practical exterior." Sam felt the familiar tightness in his chest at the mention of Martha, but it was gentler now, tinged with warmth rather than the sharp edge of fresh grief. She was always better at seeing the good in people than they were at seeing it in themselves. That evening, Sam spread the library books across his kitchen table and began the work of educating himself about what lay ahead. The gestation period for donkeys was longer than horses, nearly a year, which meant Hope had months to go before the foal arrived. But there were preparations to be made, knowledge to acquire, and potential complications to understand. As he read, Sam found himself thinking about the dreams he and Martha had shared in their early years. They'd talked endlessly about the children they would raise, the family traditions they would create, the legacy they would leave behind. When those dreams failed to materialize, they'd channeled their parental instincts into the ranch and the animals they cared for. But this felt different, more immediate and personal than anything they'd experienced. Over the following weeks, Sam threw himself into preparing for Hope's foal with the dedication of an expectant father. He researched nutrition requirements for pregnant mares, studied birthing processes and potential complications, and began modifying the barn to create a proper foaling stall. The work gave him purpose beyond his daily routine, a future event that required planning and anticipation. Dr. Rodriguez confirmed the pregnancy during her next visit, estimating that Hope was about 3 months along based on her physical development. "She's in excellent condition," Elena assured Sam as she completed her examination. "Strong and healthy, with no signs of complications. You've done remarkable work getting her to this point. What should I be watching for? What can go wrong?" Elena smiled at his obvious concern. "You sound like every new father I've ever met. Most pregnancies proceed normally with basic care and attention. We'll monitor her progress, adjust her nutrition as needed, and make sure she has a safe place to deliver when the time comes. And after, raising a foal, I've never done anything like that. Sam, you spent your whole life working with animals. You understand their needs, their behaviors, their instincts. Trust yourself and trust Hope. Mares have been having babies for thousands of years without veterinary degrees." Despite Elena's reassurances, Sam continued his intensive study of donkey husbandry and foal care. He found himself particularly drawn to accounts of orphaned foals and the challenges of hand-raising young animals. The stories reminded him of his own childhood on his father's ranch, where he'd learned that caring for vulnerable creatures required patience, consistency, and a willingness to put their needs above your own comfort. As Hope's pregnancy progressed, Sam began to notice changes in her behavior that went beyond the physical. She became more affectionate, seeking out his company and seeming to enjoy longer grooming sessions. She also developed distinct preferences about her environment, moving her bedding to specific spots in her stall and showing clear approval or disapproval of changes to her routine. "You're getting particular in your old age," Sam teased her one afternoon as she rejected a new brand of grain with obvious disdain. "Good thing I'm a patient man." Hope responded by gently bumping his shoulder with her nose, a gesture that had become her way of showing affection. The simple contact never failed to warm Sam's heart, reminding him daily of the bond they'd formed and the trust she'd placed in him. On a particularly warm evening in late summer, Sam sat on his porch with one of Martha's old recipe boxes in his lap. He'd found it while cleaning out a kitchen cabinet, and for the first time since her death, he'd been able to open it without feeling overwhelmed by grief. Inside were hundreds of cards written in Martha's careful handwriting, documenting decades of meals she'd prepared for their family of two. As he flipped through the familiar recipes, Sam was struck by how many of them were designed for sharing casseroles that fed a crowd, holiday treats that filled multiple containers, bread recipes that yielded enough loaves to feed the neighborhood. Martha had always cooked with abundance, as if she expected their empty nest to fill with unexpected guests at any moment. "She was getting ready for something," Sam murmured, understanding flooding through him as he looked at Hope grazing in her paddock. "All those recipes, all that food she was preparing for the family we thought we'd never have." Hope looked up at the sound of his voice, her ears pricked forward with interest. In the fading light, her pregnant silhouette was clearly visible, a promise of new life that would soon transform their quiet ranch into something larger and more complex. Sam closed the recipe box and held it against his chest, feeling Martha's presence in the warm cardboard and faded ink. For the first time since her death, he could imagine using these recipes again, cooking for more than just himself, filling their home with the sounds and smells of family life. It wouldn't be the family they'd originally planned, but it would be family nonetheless, built on love and choice rather than blood and circumstance. "Thank you," he whispered, unsure whether he was speaking to Martha, to Hope, or to whatever force had brought them together. In the growing darkness, Hope nickered softly, a sound that carried across the desert air like a blessing on all the possibilities that lay ahead. The photograph album lay on Sam's kitchen table like a piece of unexploded ordnance, its burgundy leather cover faded by years of handling. He discovered it while searching for Martha's documentation about their property boundaries, and for 3 days it had sat unopened, too powerful to touch but too important to put away. This morning, with Hope grazing peacefully outside his window and coffee warming his hands, Sam finally found the courage to lift the cover. The first page nearly broke his resolve. Martha at 19, radiant in her wedding dress, looking at the camera with a joy so pure it seemed to illuminate the yellowed photograph from within. Sam touched the plastic covering with one finger, remembering the weight of her hand in his as they stood before the preacher, promising each other everything they had to give. He turned the page and found their honeymoon pictures from California. Martha feeding seagulls on the beach, her hair whipping in the ocean breeze. Sam trying to look sophisticated beside a Hollywood sign he'd never seen before or since. They looked impossibly young, unaware of the sorrows and challenges that lay ahead, focused only on the bright future they were building together. Page by page, Sam moved through the visual record of their life. Martha holding a newborn calf, her face soft with the maternal love that had no other outlet. Sam standing beside his first prize bull, pride and satisfaction written in every line of his body. The two of them at church socials, county fairs, neighbors' weddings, always together, always content in each other's company. The middle section of the album contained the hardest. Images, photos from the years when they tried desperately to have children. Martha holding other people's babies at church gatherings. Her smile bright, but her eyes holding a sadness only Sam could see. Pictures of the nursery they prepared and then quietly dismantled. The baby furniture donated to families who needed it more. But those painful images were balanced by others that showed their resilience and adaptability. Martha teaching Sunday school, surrounded by children who loved her fearlessly. Sam helping his neighbors with their ranch work, becoming the reliable friend everyone turned to in times of need. They'd found ways to channel their parental instincts into the community, becoming godparents and mentors to dozens of young people who'd grown up knowing they had a safe harbor at Broken Creek Ranch. Hope appeared at the kitchen window, as if sensing Sam's emotional state. She'd developed an uncanny ability to know when he needed her presence, showing up at moments when grief or loneliness threatened to overwhelm him. Sam opened the window and reached out to scratch behind her ears, drawing comfort from her solid warmth. "Look at this girl," he said, turning the album so she could see a picture of Martha bottle-feeding an orphan lamb. "That's my Martha. She never met a creature that didn't need mothering." Hope studied the photograph with what seemed like genuine interest. Her ears pricked forward as if she could somehow sense the love radiating from the image. Sam had grown accustomed to talking to her about Martha, finding that sharing memories helped keep them alive rather than buried. As Hope's pregnancy advanced into its middle months, Sam noticed changes in his own daily routine that went beyond simple animal care. He found himself cooking again, really cooking rather than just heating up whatever was convenient. Martha's recipes called to him from the kitchen drawer, and he discovered that following her instructions felt like having a conversation with her. Across the years, he started small her cornbread recipe that he'd watched her make hundreds of times, the beef stew that had warmed their winters for 4 decades. Each dish carried memories of Martha's hands working the dough, her voice explaining the technique she'd learned from her own mother. Cooking became a form of communion, a way of honoring her legacy, while nourishing himself for the challenges ahead. The community had begun to take notice of Sam's transformation. Reverend Tom commented on it during his monthly visits, observing that Sam seemed more present, more engaged with the world around him. The ladies from Martha's quilting circle brought preserves and asked pointed questions about his health and happiness. Even Bill Thompson remarked that the ranch looked better than it had in years, with fences mended and buildings showing signs of fresh attention. "That donkey's been good for you," Bill said one afternoon as they worked together to repair a gate that had been hanging crooked for months. "Martha would be pleased to see you taking such good care of yourself again." Sam paused in his work, considering the observation. "I think she'd be more pleased about Hope than about me." Martha always said the best way to heal a broken heart was to find something smaller and more broken that needed fixing. "Maybe, but seems to me like you're both doing the fixing and getting fixed at the same time." The truth of Bill's words stayed with Sam through the afternoon as he worked in Martha's garden, now flourishing under his renewed attention. The vegetables were thriving in the rich soil she'd spent decades building, and he'd added new sections, specifically for crops that would benefit Hope and her coming foal. There was something deeply satisfying about working the earth that had been so important to Martha, feeling connected to her through the tangible results of her care and planning. As autumn approached, Sam began preparing for winter with a thoroughness he hadn't shown in years. He stocked extra feed for Hope, ordered bedding materials for the foaling stall, and winterized the barn with the kind of attention to detail that Martha had always insisted upon. The work felt familiar and right, like stepping back into a role. He'd temporarily forgotten how to play. Dr. Rodriguez's visits had become monthly events that Sam looked forward to with the anticipation of an expectant father. Elena always brought updates on the investigation into animal abandonments. Several arrests had been made, and the problem seemed to be decreasing, but Sam found himself more interested in Hope's progress and the foal's development. Everything looks perfect, Elena assured him after one examination. Hope's in excellent condition. The foal is developing normally, and you've created an ideal environment for both of them. Have you thought about what you'll name the baby? Sam hadn't. Actually, he'd been so focused on ensuring a safe delivery that he hadn't allowed himself to think much beyond that moment. But Elena's question sparked something in his imagination, a sense of anticipation that went beyond worry and preparation into genuine excitement. I suppose it depends on what it is, boy or girl, Sam said. And what it looks like, what kind of personality it shows. Martha had a gift for names, Elena observed. I remember her naming all the animals at the church's petting zoo. She always seemed to know exactly what to call each one. That evening, Sam found himself back at the photograph album, this time seeking inspiration rather than just remembrance. He found a picture of Martha with her arms around a group of children at a church picnic, all of them laughing at something outside the camera's view. Her joy was infectious, even across the years, a reminder of her gift for finding happiness in simple moments. Another photograph showed Martha planting the apple tree that now shaded Hope's paddock, her hands dirty and her face determined as she worked to establish something that would outlast them both. The tree had grown tall and strong over the decades, providing exactly the shelter and sustenance Martha had envisioned when she chose its location. As Sam closed the album that night, he felt a sense of peace that had been missing from his life since Martha's death. The photographs hadn't brought her back, but they'd reminded him that love didn't end with death. It transformed, finding new expressions and new recipients. Hope and her foal weren't replacements for the family he and Martha had never had. They were the continuation of a story that neither death nor grief could stop. Outside his window, Hope stood silhouetted against the star-filled sky, her pregnant form a promise of new beginnings rooted in old love. Sam touched Martha's ring through his shirt and smiled, finally ready to embrace whatever came next, without feeling like he was betraying what had come before. The official-looking envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning that had started like any other. Sam was mixing Hope's breakfast supplements when he heard the mail truck grinding up his long driveway, unusual since his mail was typically delivered to the box at the main road. The driver, a young man Sam didn't recognize, handed him the certified letter with an apologetic expression. Sorry to bother you, Mr. Hayes. This one requires a signature. Sam signed for the envelope with growing unease. Legal correspondence rarely brought good news, and the return address confirmed his fears. Patterson, Wells and Associates, attorneys at law, Phoenix, Arizona. Sam waited until the mail truck disappeared before tearing open the envelope with hands that shook more than he cared to admit. The letter was typed on expensive letterhead and written in the cold, precise language of legal threats. As Sam read, his blood pressure rose with each carefully crafted sentence. Dear Mr. Hayes, we represent our client, Mr. Darren Kowalski, in a matter concerning the unlawful possession of his property, specifically one Jenny Donkey, female, currently harbored on your ranch. Our client has recently become aware that you have in your possession an animal that was removed from his property without his knowledge or consent. Sam read the letter twice before the full implications sank in. Someone was claiming ownership of Hope, demanding her immediate return, and threatening legal action if Sam didn't comply within 30 days. The letter included photographs of Hope, taken from what must have been a considerable distance. Proof that someone had been watching his ranch without his knowledge. The pictures showed Hope in her paddock, clearly pregnant and healthy. A stark contrast to the dying creature Sam had found tied to the mesquite tree months ago. According to the letter, Darren Kowalski claimed that Hope had wandered away from his property during a storm and that Sam had unlawfully appropriated her instead of making reasonable efforts to locate her owner. Sam's hands crumpled the letter as rage flooded through him. The barefaced lies in the document were staggering. Hope hadn't wandered anywhere. She'd been deliberately abandoned, left to die in one of the cruelest acts Sam had ever witnessed. The idea that her abuser was now trying to reclaim her, especially in her pregnant state, made Sam's vision blur with fury. He called Dr. Rodriguez immediately, his voice shaking as he read the letter aloud over the phone. Elena listened in silence until he finished, then let out a string of curses in both English and Spanish that would have made a ranch hand blush. That lying piece of human garbage, she spat when she found her professional composure. Sam, we documented everything when I first examined Hope. I have photographs, medical records, detailed notes about her condition. No court in the world would believe she wandered away and ended up in that state. But can they take her? Legally, I mean, Elena was quiet for a long moment. Sam, property law is tricky when it comes to animals. If he can prove ownership, registration papers, bills of sale, veterinary records, he might have a case, regardless of how she ended up on your property. The law doesn't always align with what's morally right. Sam felt the ground shift beneath his feet. The possibility of losing Hope had never occurred to him as anything more than an abstract concern. She was family now, as much a part of his life as Martha had been. The thought of watching her loaded into someone else's trailer, of never knowing if she and her foal were safe and loved, was unbearable. What do? First, don't panic. Second, get yourself a lawyer. This isn't something you can handle alone, and 30 days isn't much time to build a defense. I'll start gathering all my documentation, and I'll reach out to the other vets in the county who've been dealing with these abandonment cases. If Kowalski is behind the other incidents, we need to establish a pattern of abuse. After hanging up with Elena, Sam walked out to Hope's paddock on unsteady legs. She was grazing peacefully in the morning sun, her sides now noticeably rounded with the foal she carried. At nearly 6 months pregnant, she had the contented look of a creature that felt safe and loved. The idea of disrupting that peace, of forcing her back into the hands of someone who tried to kill her, made Sam physically ill. Hope looked up as he approached and nickered a greeting that had become as familiar as his own heartbeat. She walked to the fence and pushed her nose through the rails, clearly expecting the apple slices he usually brought for their morning visit. Sam obliged, his hands trembling as she took the treats with her usual gentle precision. I won't let them take you, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I don't care what papers they have or what lies they tell. You're safe here, and you're staying here. Hope seemed to sense his distress. Instead of returning to her grazing after finishing the apples, she remained at the fence, her warm breath fogging in the cool morning air as she watched him with those intelligent dark eyes. Sam reached through the rails to stroke her neck, drawing comfort from her solid presence. The next few days passed in a blur of phone calls and research as Sam tried to understand his legal position. He retained a lawyer in town, a practical woman named Rebecca Martinez, who specialized in agricultural law and spoke with the kind of directness Sam appreciated. Rebecca reviewed the threatening letter and Elena's medical documentation with professional detachment before delivering her assessment. The good news is that Kowalski's claim is obviously fraudulent, she told Sam during their first meeting. No animal wanders away and ends up tied to a tree, starving and abused. The bad news is that proving fraud can be expensive and time-consuming, and he might have legitimate ownership documents, even if he's lying about how Hope ended up on your property. How is that possible? People buy and sell animals all the time without considering their welfare. Kowalski might have purchased Hope legitimately, then abandoned her when she became inconvenient. Or he might have stolen her from someone else and is now trying to reclaim what he sees as valuable property. Rebecca explained that Hope's pregnancy made her significantly more valuable than when Sam had found her. A healthy Jenny carrying a foal could sell for several $1,000s, especially if the father was a quality jack. The timing of Kowalski's claim, coming just as Hope's pregnancy became visible, suggested that profit rather than genuine ownership was driving his actions. What are our chances in court? Hard to say without knowing what evidence he can produce. But Sam, I have to ask, are you prepared for what this might cost, both financially and emotionally? Legal battles can drag on for months, and there's no guarantee of the outcome you want. Sam thought of Martha's ring warming against his chest, of the promise he'd made to Hope in the darkness of her paddock, of the foal that would soon depend on both of them for survival. Yes, he said without hesitation. I'm prepared for whatever it takes. Rebecca nodded approvingly. Then we fight. But we're going to need more than just medical records and good intentions. We need to prove that Kowalski is lying about how Hope ended up on your property, and that means investigating his background and connections to the other abandonment cases. As Sam drove home from the lawyer's office, he felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on him like a physical burden. For months, he'd been rebuilding his life around Hope and the future they were creating together. Now that future hung in the balance, threatened by forces beyond his control, and dependent on the vagaries of a legal system that might not recognize the bonds that really mattered. Hope was waiting at the fence when he arrived home, as if she'd sensed his absence and was eager for his return. Sam spent the rest of the afternoon with her, brushing her coat and talking through his fears and frustrations. She listened with the patient attention that had become one of her most endearing qualities, occasionally nickering responses that sounded remarkably like encouragement. As evening fell, Sam found himself thinking about Martha and the way she'd faced challenges throughout their marriage. She'd never been one to back down from a fight when something important was at stake, but she'd also understood that some battles required more than righteous anger to win. She'd been strategic in her approach to problems, gathering allies and information before making her moves. I need to be smart about this, Sam told Hope as he filled her water trough. Not just angry, but smart. Martha would have had a plan, but by now would have figured out how to turn this around and use it against whoever's trying to hurt you. Hope nuzzled his shoulder in response, and Sam felt a spark of the determination that had carried him through 5 decades of ranching and 45 years of marriage. He wouldn't let Hope down, wouldn't let fear or legal technicalities separate them from the family they'd become. Whatever it took, whoever he had to fight, Hope would stay where she belonged, home, safe and loved. With her foal growing strong inside her and a future full of possibilities stretching out before them both, Sam was in the barn adjusting Hope's feeding schedule when the first contraction hit her. It was subtle, just a tightening of her sides and a momentary pause in her eating, but Sam had been watching for signs with the intensity of an expectant father. Hope was still 3 weeks from her due date, but Dr. Rodriguez had warned him that stress could trigger early labor, and the legal threat hanging over them had created exactly the kind of tension that could affect a pregnant Mari. Easy, girl, Sam murmured, moving to her side with practiced calm. Let's just see what's happening here. Hope turned her head to look at him, her eyes showing the first hints of the inward focus that meant labor was beginning. Sam's heart rate spiked even as he forced his voice to remain steady and reassuring. Early foals faced additional risks, and Hope would need every bit of his experience and attention to safely deliver. Her baby, the timing couldn't have been worse. Tomorrow was the preliminary hearing where Judge Harrison would decide whether Kowalski's claim had enough merit to proceed to trial. Rebecca had spent weeks building their defense, gathering evidence of Kowalski's connection to other animal abandonment cases and documenting Hope's condition when Sam found her. But the hearing would determine whether Hope could remain on the ranch while the case was decided, or whether she'd have to be held in legal custody until ownership was established. Sam called Dr. Rodriguez while keeping one eye on Hope, who was now pacing restlessly in her stall. Elena answered on the first ring, already knowing why he was calling. How far apart are the contractions? Maybe 10 minutes, but they're getting stronger. Elena, if this baby comes tonight, I'll be there in 30 minutes. Sam, listen to me. Hope is strong and healthy, and early doesn't necessarily mean dangerous. We've prepared for this possibility, and everything we need is ready. Focus on keeping her calm and comfortable. After hanging up, Sam settled into the routine he'd practiced dozens of times in his mind. He checked the foaling stall he'd prepared months ago, ensuring the deep bedding was clean and the emergency supplies were within easy reach. He activated the heat lamps that would keep a premature foal warm and filled buckets with clean water that might be needed for the delivery. Hope's contractions intensified as the evening wore on, coming closer together and lasting longer. Sam stayed with her constantly, his presence seeming to calm her during the most difficult moments. She would press her nose against his chest during contractions, as if drawing strength from his steady heartbeat and familiar scent. That's it, Hope. You're doing perfect. Just breathe through it. Let your body do what it knows how to do. Martha had taught him to talk animals through difficult moments, believing that the sound of a calm human voice could provide comfort, even when the words themselves had no meaning. Sam found himself using phrases Martha had whispered to him during her own painful final days, promises of love and presence that transcended immediate circumstances. Elena arrived as Hope entered active labor, her professional equipment transforming the barn into a makeshift delivery room. She examined Hope with gentle efficiency, her expression remaining carefully neutral as she assessed the situation. Everything looks normal for early labor, she announced. The foal is positioned correctly, and Hope's body is responding as it should. We just need to be patient and let nature take its course. But patience was a luxury Sam couldn't afford. Every hour that passed brought them closer to tomorrow's hearing, where Hope's fate would be decided by legal arguments rather than love or need. The irony of fighting for custody of a donkey who was simultaneously bringing new life into the world wasn't lost on him. As midnight approached, Hope's labor reached the final stage. Sam knelt beside her in the straw, one hand on her neck while Elena monitored the foal's progress. Hope's breathing was labored but steady, her body working with ancient instincts to bring new life safely into the world. I can see the hooves, Elena announced, her voice tight with concentration. Hope, you're almost there, girl. Just a few more pushes. Sam had witnessed dozens of births on the ranch over the years, but nothing had prepared him for the emotional intensity of watching Hope struggled to deliver her baby. Every contraction seemed to tear at his heart, even as he marveled at her strength and determination. She trusted him completely, looking to him for reassurance during the most vulnerable moments of her life. It was then, in the depths of that transformative night, that Sam discovered Martha's final letters. Elena had stepped outside to call her backup veterinarian for advice about a potential complication, leaving Sam alone with Hope during a brief lull between contractions. As he reached for a clean towel from the supply kit, his hand brushed against something unexpected, an envelope tucked behind the medical supplies, bearing his name in Martha's careful handwriting. Sam's hand shook as he opened the envelope, immediately recognizing the lavender-scented stationery Martha had used for special occasions. The letter was dated 3 days before her death, written in the weak but determined script of someone fighting pain and medication to leave one final message. My dear Sam, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and you've finally found the courage to care for something again. I hid this letter in the veterinary kit because I knew that's where you go when your heart was ready to love again, not to the places that remind you of me, but to the place where we help things heal. Sam's vision blurred as he read. Hope's soft breathing, the only sound in the barn as she rested between contractions. "I've been so worried about leaving you alone, but I realized tonight that I won't really be leaving you alone at all. You have too much love in your heart to let it stay buried forever. Someone or something will meet you, and when that happens, you'll remember who you really are, not just my husband, but a healer, a protector, a man who makes the world better just by being in it." The letter continued for 2 pages, filled with Martha's reflections on their marriage, her hopes for his future, and her absolute certainty that he would find his way back to joy. She wrote about the foaling kit they'd assembled together, the way she'd watched him tend injured animals with a gentleness that contradicted his gruff exterior, and her conviction that caring for vulnerable creatures was his true calling. "Don't mourn for me too long, my love. I want you to laugh again, to feel proud of yourself again, to wake up each morning with something to look forward to. I want you to love something the way you love me, completely, protectively, with your whole heart. That's how I'll know you're really living instead of just existing." The final paragraph was the hardest to read. "Whatever brought you to this moment, whatever creature needs your help, embrace it as my final gift to you. Love doesn't end when we die, Sam. It transforms, finds new expressions, new recipients. The love you gave me for 45 years doesn't disappear just because I can't hold it anymore. Pour it into whatever needs healing, and know that every act of kindness you perform is my love continuing to work in the world through your hands." Hope stirred, drawing Sam back to the present moment with a gentle nicker. He folded Martha's letter carefully and tucked it into his shirt pocket, next to her ring, feeling as though she was somehow present in the barn with them. "She knew," Sam whispered to Hope, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "Somehow, she knew you were coming." Elena returned as Hope entered the final stage of labor, immediately sensing the shift in Sam's emotional state. "Everything okay?" "More than okay," Sam replied, his voice steady despite his tears. "Everything's exactly as it should be." The foal arrived at 2:47 a.m., sliding into the world in a rush of fluid and startled breathing. Elena worked quickly to clear its airway while Sam held Hope's head, whispering encouragement as she completed the hardest work of her life. "It's a filly," Elena announced, her voice filled with joy and relief. "Small but perfect and breathing." "Well?" Sam watched in wonder as the tiny foal struggled to her feet, her legs impossibly long and delicate as she took her first wobbly steps toward her mother. Hope nicked softly, her maternal instincts immediately engaged as she began the patient work of cleaning and bonding with her baby. "What will you name her?" Elena asked as she completed her examination of both mother and foal. Sam thought of Martha's letter, of the love that continued beyond death, of the hope that had carried him through his darkest period and brought him to this moment of pure joy. "Martha," he said without hesitation. "Her name is Martha." As dawn approached, Sam sat in the straw watching Hope nurse her foal for the first time. Baby Martha was smaller than a full-term foal should be, but she was strong and alert already, showing the intelligence and gentle nature that marked her mother. The sight of them together, Hope protective and proud, Martha eager and trusting filled Sam with a peace he hadn't felt since his wife's death. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m., just 6 hours away. Rebecca had spent weeks preparing their case, gathering evidence and witness statements that would prove Hope's rescue was legitimate and necessary. But now, watching the tiny family he'd helped create, Sam realized that some bonds transcended legal documents and property claims. Hope wasn't just a rescued animal anymore. She was the mother of his granddaughter, the keeper of his renewed purpose, the living embodiment of Martha's final gift. Whatever happened in court, whatever legal machinations Kowalski employed, Sam would not let this family be torn apart. Elena packed up her equipment as morning light filtered through barn windows, promising to return later to check on both patients. Before leaving, she placed a hand on Sam's shoulder and looked seriously into his eyes. "Sam, I want you to know that what you've done here rescuing Hope, seeing her through this pregnancy, helping her deliver a healthy foal, it's nothing short of miraculous. Don't let anyone convince you that legal ownership matters more than the love and care you've provided." As Elena's truck disappeared down the ranch road, Sam remained in the barn with Hope and baby Martha, drawing strength from their presence for the battle that lay ahead. In a few hours, he would stand before a judge and fight for the right to keep his family together. The outcome was uncertain, the opposing forces formidable, but Sam no longer faced the challenge alone. He had Martha's love living on in his heart, Hope's trust warming his soul, and a tiny foal named Martha who would grow up knowing what it meant to be cherished and protected. Whatever the court decided, whatever Kowalski threatened, Sam would fight with the fierce determination of a man who had finally remembered what he was living for. The Maricopa County Courthouse stood like a monument to bureaucracy in the desert heat, its concrete walls and imposing columns designed to intimidate rather than comfort. Sam sat in the parking lot at 8:30 in the morning, watching lawyers and petitioners stream through the entrance while he gathered courage for what lay ahead. He hadn't slept since Hope went into labor 18 hours ago, but adrenaline and determination kept him alert. Rebecca Martinez appeared at his truck window, her briefcase in one hand and a steaming cup of coffee in the other. "How are Hope and the foal?" "Perfect," Sam replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. Little Martha took to nursing right away, and Hope's already back on her feet. Elena says they're both doing better than expected for an early delivery. Good. Judge Harrison is known for being practical about animal welfare cases, but he's also a stickler for property law. We need to be prepared for anything. Rebecca's expression was serious but not pessimistic. Our evidence is strong, Sam. Kowalski's story has more holes than Swiss cheese, and Elena's medical documentation is compelling. But at the end of the day, this comes down to whether the judge believes rescue constitutes theft. They walked into the courthouse together, Sam's boots echoing against the marble floors with each deliberate step. The courtroom was smaller than he'd expected, more like a conference room than the dramatic spaces he'd seen on television. Judge Harrison sat behind an imposing oak bench, reviewing documents with the methodical attention of someone who took his responsibilities seriously. Darren Kowalski was already seated at the plaintiff's table with his attorney, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit who exuded the kind of confidence that came from winning more cases than he lost. Kowalski himself was younger than Sam had expected, maybe 45, with the soft appearance of someone who spent more time in offices than on ranches. When he looked at Sam, his eyes held a coldness that spoke of someone who saw animals as commodities rather than living beings. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Harrison," the bailiff announced, and the small courtroom came to attention. Judge Harrison was a man in his 60s with silver hair and the weathered face of someone who'd spent time outdoors before trading his boots for judicial robes. He surveyed the courtroom with sharp eyes that missed nothing, lingering for a moment on Sam before turning his attention to the docket. "We're here for a preliminary hearing in the matter of Kowalski versus Hayes, concerning ownership of one Jenny donkey currently in the defendant's possession. Mr. Patterson, please present your client's case." Kowalski's attorney rose with theatrical precision, his opening statement delivered with the polished confidence of someone accustomed to winning through intimidation rather than facts. He painted a picture of Kowalski as a legitimate businessman, whose valuable breeding stock had been essentially stolen by an opportunistic neighbor who'd refused to make reasonable efforts to locate the rightful owner. "Your Honor, Mr. Kowalski has owned this particular Jenny for 3 years, purchased from a reputable breeder in Nevada for the express purpose of building his livestock operation. When she disappeared during a severe thunderstorm, he assumed she had been killed or seriously injured. It was only recently that he learned Mr. Hayes had been harboring her on his property, allowing her to breed and essentially profiting from Mr. Kowalski's investment. The attorney produced what appeared to be legitimate ownership documents, a bill of sale, veterinary records, and photographs of Hope in what looked like reasonable conditions. To someone unfamiliar with the case, the evidence might seem compelling. When Rebecca rose to present their defense, Sam felt his heart hammering against his ribs. Everything depended on the next few minutes, on whether a judge who'd never met Hope could understand what she meant beyond her monetary value. Your Honor, this case isn't about a storm or a lost animal finding her way home. This is about deliberate abandonment and cruelty, followed by an attempt to reclaim valuable property only after someone else's care and expense has increased its worth. Rebecca's voice carried the authority of absolute conviction. Mr. Hayes found this Jenny tied to a tree, starving and dying in a condition that could only result from deliberate abuse. He saved her life, nursed her back to health, and provided the care that allowed her to successfully carry and deliver a foal. Rebecca presented Elena's medical documentation, photographs of Hope's condition when Sam found her, and testimony from other veterinarians who treated similar abandonment cases. The evidence was damning. No animal wandered away unended. Up in the condition Hope had been in when Sam discovered her, but it was Rebecca's final argument that shifted the energy in the courtroom. Your Honor, last night while we were preparing for this hearing, this Jenny gave birth to a healthy foal in Mr. Hayes's barn, under the care of a licensed veterinarian. The foal is premature, born early likely due to the stress of this legal proceeding. Both mother and baby are thriving because they're in the hands of someone who sees them as family, not property. Judge Harrison leaned forward in his chair. The foal was born last night? Yes, Your Honor. At 2:47 a.m., Dr. Rodriguez, who has been monitoring the pregnancy since Mr. Hayes rescued the mother, can provide detailed testimony about the birth and the ongoing care both animals require. Kowalski's attorney objected, claiming that the timing of the birth was irrelevant to the question of ownership. But Sam could see that Judge Harrison was thinking beyond legal technicalities to the practical realities of animal welfare. Mr. Hayes, the judge said directly, please tell me in your own words how you came to possess this animal. Sam rose on unsteady legs, feeling the weight of Hope and baby Martha's future resting on his ability to convey the truth. He'd never been comfortable speaking in public, preferring action to words, but Martha's letter in his pocket gave him strength. Your Honor, I found her tied to a dead mesquite tree on my property, left to die in the desert heat. She was skin and bones, dehydrated, covered in rope burns where she'd tried to free herself. No animal gets in that condition by wandering away from a storm. Someone put her there deliberately, intending for her to suffer. Sam's voice grew stronger as he continued. I cut her free and took her home because that's what decent people do when they find something helpless and suffering. I never thought about ownership or profit. I thought about saving a life that someone else had thrown away. And now she's family. Her foal is named after my late wife, and they both depend on me for everything: food, shelter, medical care, love. I can't prove I own them legally, but I can prove I've earned the right to protect them. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Harrison considered the testimony. Sam could hear his own heartbeat, could feel Martha's ring warm against his chest, could imagine Hope and baby Martha waiting for him to come home. Finally, the judge spoke. This court will recess for 30 minutes while I review the evidence and consider my decision. As people filed out of the courtroom, Sam remained seated, too nervous to stand and too invested in the outcome to leave. Rebecca squeezed his shoulder, reassuringly, but her expression showed the same uncertainty that was eating at Sam's stomach. In 30 minutes, he would learn whether love and care mattered more than legal documents, whether Hope and baby Martha would remain safe on the ranch. or be torn away from the only home the foal had ever known. The wait felt eternal, each minute stretching like an hour as Sam prayed to Martha, to God, to anyone who might be listening, that justice would mean more than just following rules. Judge Harrison returned to the courtroom exactly 30 minutes. Later, his expression unreadable as he reviewed his notes one final time. The silence stretched unbearably as lawyers, plaintiffs, and spectators waited for a decision that would determine Hope and baby Martha's future. Sam gripped the edge of his chair, feeling Martha's letter crinkle against his chest with each labored breath. This case presents a conflict between property rights and animal welfare, Judge Harrison began, his voice carrying the weight of careful deliberation. While the law traditionally favors documented ownership, it also recognizes that abandonment and cruelty can invalidate such claims. Sam's heart hammered against his ribs as the judge continued his analysis. Mr. Kowalski has presented ownership documents that appear legitimate on their face. However, his explanation for how this animal ended up in the condition Mr. Hayes describes is simply not credible. No animal wanders away during a storm and ends up tied to a tree, starving and abused. Kowalski's attorney started to object, but Judge Harrison silenced him with a raised hand. Furthermore, the timing of Mr. Kowalski's claim raises serious questions about his motives. He made no effort to locate this animal when she allegedly disappeared, filed no police reports, placed no advertisements. He only came forward after she had been nursed back to health and her pregnancy became valuable. Sam felt a flutter of hope as the judge's reasoning became clear. Justice Harrison wasn't just following legal precedent. He was thinking about what was right for Hope and her foal. The medical evidence presented by Dr. Rodriguez is compelling and disturbing. The photographs and veterinary records clearly show an animal that has been deliberately abused and abandoned. Mr. Hayes' rescue of this animal likely saved her life and certainly saved the life of her unborn foal. The judge paused, looking directly at Kowalski with an expression of barely controlled disgust. Mr. Kowalski, your claim that this animal wandered away from your property is contradicted by every piece of evidence in this case. Your failure to search for her when she allegedly disappeared, combined with the condition in which she was found, suggests that you deliberately abandoned her. Under Arizona law, abandonment of an animal constitutes forfeiture of ownership rights. Kowalski's face reddened as he whispered urgently to his attorney, but Sam could see that the tide had turned decisively in their favor. Moreover, Judge Harrison continued, this court must consider the welfare of the newborn foal, who was born prematurely and requires ongoing specialized care. Removing her from the environment where she was born, from the veterinary support system that delivered her safely, and from the caregiver she has known since birth would constitute a form of cruelty in itself. Sam felt tears of relief burning behind his eyes as the judge reached his conclusion. Therefore, this court finds that Mr. Kowalski has forfeited any ownership rights to this animal through abandonment and neglect, Mr. Hayes' rescue and subsequent care of both mother and foal constitutes legitimate acquisition under the doctrine of abandoned property. His continuing care demonstrates his fitness as their guardian. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed through the small courtroom like a gunshot. The plaintiff's petition is denied. Mr. Hayes retains custody of both animals and this court strongly recommends that the district attorney investigate Mr. Kowalski for animal cruelty. Sam's legs gave out as relief flooded through him, leaving him seated and shaking while Rebecca pumped his hand in congratulation. Across the aisle, Kowalski was arguing furiously with his attorney, clearly prepared to appeal the decision, but Sam no longer cared about future legal challenges. Hope and baby Martha were safe, legally and definitively his to protect Dodd as the courtroom emptied. Judge Harrison approached Sam personally, something the bailiff clearly found unusual. Mr. Hayes, I want you to know that your testimony was compelling, not because of what you said, but because of who you clearly are. This court sees a lot of people who treat animals as property, but rarely do we see someone who understands that caring for vulnerable creatures is a sacred responsibility. Sam struggled to find words adequate to his gratitude. Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you for seeing the truth. The truth was never in doubt, Mr. Hayes. The only question was whether the law would be flexible enough to support what was right. Today, I'm proud to say it was. The drive home from the courthouse passed in a blur of desert landscape and overwhelming emotion. Sam called Elena from the truck to share the news, his voice breaking as he tried to explain what the victory meant. They're safe, Elena. Hope and little Martha, they're coming home with me forever. I never doubted it for a second, Elena replied, though Sam could hear the relief in her voice. That judge saw what we all see, that Hope couldn't have found a better home if she'd chosen it herself. When Sam turned into the ranch road, he saw signs that word of the victory had already spread. Bill Thompson's truck was parked by the barn, along with several other vehicles belonging to neighbors and friends. As Sam pulled up to the house, people emerged from the barn and porch, their faces bright with celebration. "How are our girls?" called Sarah Henderson from the library, who had apparently joined the welcoming committee. "Perfect," Sam replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Both of them are perfect." The celebration was subdued but genuine, fitting for a community that understood the real stakes of the legal battle. These weren't just people congratulating Sam on winning a case. They were neighbors, acknowledging that justice had prevailed and a family had been kept together. Hope seemed to sense the positive energy. When Sam entered her stall, she nickered a greeting and moved protectively close to baby Martha, who was sleeping peacefully in the deep straw. The sight of them together, healthy, safe, and completely trusting in his care, nearly overwhelmed Sam with gratitude. "It's over, girl," he whispered, stroking Hope's neck with gentle fingers. "Nobody's ever going to take you away from here. This is your home for as long as you want it." Hope responded by nuzzling his shoulder in the affectionate gesture that had become their private greeting. Baby Martha stirred at the sound of voices, opening dark eyes that already showed the intelligence that marked her mother. When she saw Sam, she struggled to her feet and took a few wobbly steps in his direction, clearly recognizing him as Family Dad. As evening approached and the last of the well-wishers departed, Sam found himself alone in the barn with Hope and baby Martha. He sat on a hay bale and watched them interact, marveling at the maternal patience Hope showed and the eager curiosity little Martha displayed about her world. The legal victory felt important, but it was also just the beginning. Baby Martha would need months of careful attention as she grew and developed. Hope would require ongoing care to fully recover from her traumatic past and early delivery. The ranch itself needed improvements and upgrades to accommodate their expanding family. But for the first time since Martha's death, Sam looked forward to the challenges ahead rather than dreading them. He had purpose again, people and creatures who depended on him, a future that held more than just memories and regret. That night, as Sam prepared to return to the house, he touched Martha's letter in his pocket and felt her presence as clearly as if she was standing beside him in the barn. She had been right. Love didn't end with death. It transformed, finding new expressions and new recipients, growing stronger rather than weaker when it was shared freely. Hope and baby Martha were safe, legally and permanently his to protect. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys. But tonight it was enough to know that sometimes justice prevailed, love conquered fear, and broken hearts could heal in the most unexpected ways. 1 year later, Sam stood at his kitchen window, watching Hope and baby Martha graze in the pasture that had become their domain. Martha, no longer a baby at nearly a year old, had grown into a curious and confident young donkey with her mother's gentle nature and an adventurous spirit that kept Sam constantly entertained. Hope had fully recovered from her ordeal, her coat now gleaming with health, and her eyes bright with the contentment of a creature who knew she was loved. The ranch bore little resemblance to the neglected property Sam had been slowly surrendering to grief 3 years earlier. Fresh paint brightened the barn, new fencing outlined improved pastures, and Martha's old garden flourished under Sam's renewed attention. The vegetable plots produced more than he could eat, with the surplus shared among neighbors who had become genuine friends rather than just concerned acquaintances checking on the lonely widower. The transformation had been gradual but profound. Word of Sam's rescue and legal victory had spread beyond the immediate community, bringing visitors who wanted to meet Hope and hear her story. Some came seeking advice about animal rescue, others simply drawn by the tale of redemption and second chances. Sam had initially resisted the attention, but Hope seemed to enjoy meeting new people, and their story had apparently inspired others to consider adoption and rescue. The biggest change was the new sign that now hung at the ranch entrance, replacing the weathered board that had simply read Broken Creek Ranch for 5 decades. The new sign, hand-carved by Sam during the long winter evenings, proclaimed Broken Creek Ranch, home of hope and family, in letters deep enough to withstand whatever weather the desert might bring. Dr. Rodriguez had become a regular visitor, stopping by monthly to check on Hope and Martha, but staying longer each time to share coffee and conversation with Sam. Their friendship had deepened beyond the professional relationship that brought them together, built on shared values and genuine affection for the animals in their care. "You know," Elena said during one recent visit, watching Martha investigate a butterfly with typical donkey determination, "I never expected that abandoned donkey to turn out to be such a natural mother. Look how patient she is with that foal." Sam followed her gaze to where Hope stood calmly while Martha practiced what appeared to be dance moves around her legs. Hope's patience with her daughter's exuberance was infinite, but she also provided gentle correction when Martha's enthusiasm threatened to get her into trouble. "She learned from the best," Sam replied, thinking of Martha's endless patience with every creature that had found its way to their ranch over the years. Some things get passed down through love rather than blood. The legal victory had indeed been final. Kujalski's appeal had been dismissed, and subsequent investigation had linked him to 6 other cases of animal abandonment across 3 counties. He'd been charged with multiple counts of animal cruelty and had received jail time that would keep him away from vulnerable creatures for the foreseeable future. The experience had led to stronger animal protection laws and better coordination between law enforcement agencies when investigating abandonment cases. More importantly for Sam, the case had connected him with a network of people who shared his commitment to animal rescue and welfare. He'd become an unofficial advisor to other ranchers dealing with abandoned animals, and Broken Creek Ranch had been designated as an emergency placement facility for creatures awaiting permanent homes. The work gave Sam a sense of purpose that extended beyond his own healing. He and Hope had saved 3 horses, 2 goats, and another donkey over the past year, finding homes for most while keeping the ones that nobody else seemed to want. The ranch was livelier than it had been since Martha's death, filled with the sounds of animals who had learned to trust again. On quiet evenings, Sam often found himself sitting on the porch with Martha's letters spread on the table beside him. He'd discovered 7 more notes hidden throughout the house and barn, each one offering wisdom and encouragement for different aspects of the journey he'd eventually take. She'd known him better than he'd known himself, understanding that his healing would come through caring for others rather than focusing on his own grief. The most recent letter had been hidden in the feed room, discovered when Sam was reorganizing supplies for the ranch's expanding population. Martha had written it specifically for the day when he'd need to decide whether his rescue work was temporary or permanent. "If you're reading this, it means you've remembered who you really are, not just my husband, but a healer, a protector, someone who makes the world better by being in it. Don't let anyone convince you that what you're doing is just a hobby or a phase. This is your calling, Sam, the work you were meant to do. I'm so proud of the man you're becoming. That letter had given Sam the courage to make Broken Creek Ranch's rescue work official, filing the paperwork to become a licensed sanctuary and establishing the funding mechanisms that would ensure its long-term viability. The transition from working ranch to rescue operation hadn't been easy, but it felt like the natural evolution of everything he and Martha had built together as autumn approached, bringing cooler temperatures and the promise of another winter. Safely spent with his expanding family, Sam reflected on the unexpected direction his life had taken. 3 years ago, he'd been a man slowly dying of loneliness and regret, convinced that his useful days were behind him. Now he was busier than he'd been in years, surrounded by creatures who depended on him and people who valued his experience and wisdom. The phone rang as Sam was preparing evening feed, a sound that no longer filled him with dread. These days, calls usually brought news of animals needing help or updates from previous rescues who had found permanent homes. Sam, it's Bill Thompson. Got a call from the sheriff's department about a situation out on Route 87. Looks like someone dumped a horse and 2 goats at the old Henderson place. They're asking if you can take them until permanent homes can be found. Sam looked out at Hope and Martha, now joined by the 3 other permanent residents who had made Broken Creek Ranch their forever home. The sight of them together, healthy, content, and secure in their belonging filled him with the same sense of rightness he'd felt the day he cut Hope free from that mesquite tree. "Tell them we'll be there within the hour," Sam replied. "And Bill, thanks for thinking of us." As Sam loaded the horse trailer with supplies and equipment, Hope and Martha approached the fence to investigate the activity. They'd learned to associate trailer preparations with new arrivals, and both showed the curious interest of creatures who understood that their family might be expanding again. "You two keep an eye on things while I'm gone," Sam told them, scratching Hope behind the ears, in the gesture that had become their private greeting. "We might have some scared animals coming home with us tonight, and they'll need to see that this is a safe place." Hope nickered in response, a sound Sam had learned to interpret as agreement and encouragement. Martha, true to her adventures nature, tried to climb into the trailer herself, clearly hoping to join the rescue mission. As Sam drove toward Route 87, with empty stalls waiting to be filled and his heart open to whatever need he might encounter, he thought about the circular nature of healing. Hope had saved him by needing to be saved, teaching him that love multiplied rather than diminished when it was shared freely. Now he was part of a larger network of people committed to the same principle, that every creature deserved a chance at safety, dignity, and love. The sun was setting behind the mountains when Sam returned to Broken Creek Ranch with 3 new residents in tow. Hope and Martha were waiting at the fence, ready to welcome the newcomers with the patient acceptance that marked truly secure creatures. As Sam unloaded the frightened animals and began the familiar process of assessment and comfort, he felt Martha's presence as clearly as if she were standing beside him. This was the life she'd envisioned for him, not a pale shadow of what they'd shared, but something new and meaningful built on the foundation of love they'd created together. Every animal he saved honored her memory, while creating new possibilities for healing and connection. The work would continue tomorrow and the day after, bringing new challenges and new opportunities to make the world a little better for creatures who had no voice to ask for help. Sam was ready for whatever came next, supported by the love of a wife who had known exactly how to set him free, guided by the wisdom of a donkey who had taught him that broken hearts could heal, and surrounded by a growing family that proved every day that love was the one force in the world that truly multiplied when shared. Hope nickered softly from her stall, and baby Martha answered with a sound that was pure contentment. In that simple exchange, Sam heard the echo of Martha's laughter, and the promise of all the tomorrows still to come.